Okay, so this is going to be an annotation video for Remains by Simon Armitage, and a good way to use this video will be to pause along, to annotate a copy of the poem as you go, and we're going to go through our usual steps. So the first step is that we read the poem to get an idea of the patterns of the intentions and also to understand the events of the poem that are being recorded. Then we go through and pick out our language, so our masts, techniques, metaphors, adjectives, alliteration, similes, triplets, sensory language. Then we have a look at the structure. Is there regular structure, irregular structure? Then we look at form. Is there a particular form that's been used, a sonnet or a ballad, or those sorts of things? And then we look at the context of the poem. So let's start with our read through. On another occasion, we get sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire, three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank, sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not, dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now. His bloody life in my bloody hands. So Armitage is known for his kind of colloquial tone, and he begins in this first stanza to tell an anecdote, so we can see that this is a poem that is being relayed as though it's a conversation, and this is the kind of setup, the camaraderie of soldiers in war, and then they're all against this looter and they shoot him. That's the upshot. Then the break across the stanzas starts to describe the body and the pain that they've caused. So the body or the corpse, and then we see this kind of beginnings of the PTSD. It's the end of that particular story, except it's not, because this blood shadow, this idea of where he was, cannot be escaped. And he's home on leave, and again we have this idea of kind of flashbacks that the soldier is having, and he can't get away from it. He's reflecting and remembering constantly. And then at the very last, we've had regular stanzas throughout, and now we have this kind of separate 2 lines where he takes responsibility. So we've got our overview and we've done our read through, so now we need to go through and pick the language out. So straight away we've got this collective responsibility through the pronoun we, and the fact that they are sent out, again we have this idea that they are ordered, that they are part of a uniformed service, a disciplined service, and therefore they're acting on orders rather than on their own volition. So they're trying to tackle looters raiding a bank. These are civilians. It's not the soldiers versus other soldiers. These are people who are taking advantage of a situation, perhaps, or perhaps who are desperate. A looter is somebody who, this noun here, a looter is somebody who takes things from unattended areas, and often people who go looting are desperate. We've got the colloquial term that they leg it up the road, so this shows perhaps the education level or the local area from which the soldier hails. And then the somebody else and somebody else, this repetition, it's almost giving anonymity to his fellow soldiers. But really it doesn't matter, because the only person that is affected and that we're hearing about is myself, the persona. Again, we have this colloquialism, they're all letting fly, and then we have, from a kind of a fairly light tone of just telling a story, perhaps over a pint in the pub, we then have the more visceral imagery. So it rips through his life, this metaphor here, for vivid and violent imagery that we have. And they've hit the looter a dozen times. He's there on the ground, inside out, and this is so casually said. However, it is very, very aggressive. And then we start to see the impact, this image of agony, the fact that they toss his guts back into his body. And then this idea, this phrase, the blood shadow, listening to Simon Armitage speak at a poetry convention, he had taken an assignment to write a poem for a television documentary, and a soldier that he interviewed, this was a true anecdote from a soldier, and they referred to it, these words are directly lifted from the mouth of that soldier who referred to the blood shadow. So it is metaphorical, but it's also true to life. And he blinks, we've got this verb blink, which transports us, and it shows the progression. It's almost filmic in the fact that you close your eyes and then you open it and there's a new scene, and we've got this flashback coming through, this repetition of probably armed, possibly not. And these adverbs are so important, because if you're probably armed, then there's a reason to shoot. If you're possibly armed, then there's a reason to wait. Again, we have the idea of it being ripped through his life, and then it's torn apart down here by a dozen rounds. And the presence, the person who has been shot is being personalised a little bit more now. It's a he. He's there in the head. He's not left for dead. And we have this soft sounds repeated, almost to try and kind of show that it's distant, it's away. And then we have, again, his bloody life, these adjectives, in my bloody hands, showing the responsibility that this soldier has for the death of the looter that he and somebody else has shot. Structurally speaking, we've got very regular stanzas, and it's written very conversationally. So we've got two end stops in the first stanza, and another one in the second, and then we start to lose control. It's almost like the regularity of the stanzas could be the meticulous mechanical movements of a soldier, but those constraints don't allow for what has happened. So all of a sudden he's running across stanzas, there's enjambment that flows through, and we connect them up before coming back to the kind of end stopped rows, that order and regularity. We have as well the ideas here, end of story except not really, the juxtaposition of these two mindsets that the voice, the persona is experiencing. And again we lose control, and we're across stanzas, and we're flowing through right to the end now, and these ideas are kind of all flowing into each other. This list here, this syndetic listing, well, asyndetic listing with lots of gaps and ideas all going through, shows the state of mind, the constant kind of adding and then a bit more. The soldier can't rest, they can't take a breath, they can't pause. And if we have a look, we don't have a rhyme scheme necessarily, we don't have even internal rhymes, we just have this kind of voice coming through, but it is very poetic. Lots of imagery, lots of language used to show that. And if we think about this poem as a whole, it is very personal. The person telling the story is speaking directly to us, and they're taking ownership of this choice that they made, or the decisions that they were given and handed down by their superior officers. And remains, the word itself, the title itself, is a link to the body of the soldier. His remains were tossed into the back of a lorry, but it's also more than that. The idea of something remaining could also be relating to the post-traumatic stress reaction. It could be linked to the body itself. It could be to the fact that when you are involved in a war, the person and the personal is removed, and what remains is just the army and the orders that you're given. But overall, this poem is packed full of imagery. It is incredibly evocative, and you could probably comment on every line. But those are just a few interpretations of how you could analyse this poem.